Welcome to the Miller Report. I'm Maggie Miller. Today we dive into a burning crisis gripping Los Angeles, homelessness, and the fires that follow in its wake. Real Clear Investigations Ana Kasparian has been looking into the matter, and she began her investigation with a tragic story of a local pediatrician whose home was engulfed in flames. Her beloved dog died in that fire. Authorities initially suspected arson, possibly linked to drug users from a nearby homeless encampment. This after the homeowner asked for a dumpster where they often gathered to be moved. Now, despite initially saying an unhoused person may have thrown something over her fence, the LAFD retracted, stating that there was no evidence that a homeless person was involved. 4 years later, that case remains unsolved. While many blame climate change for the uptick in fires, critics argue that rising homelessness is a major, often overlooked factor. A recent KCAL News investigation using LAFD data uncovered staggering numbers. Fires linked to homeless individuals have surged by 2,000 to 3,000 incidents per year since 2019. By 2024, that number nearly hit 17,000. Despite the homeless population making up less than 1% of LA's residents, they're connected to nearly half of the city's fires. Some residents say that the fires are a result of the city's failure to control the expansion of homeless encampments. LA leaders continue to cite climate change and faulty infrastructure as the primary culprits, downplaying the role of encampments. An LA journalist claims that fire officials are instructed to sidestep questions about homeless involvement, even when they know the truth. Frustrated firefighters say that they respond to the same encampments repeatedly, often risking injury. Commercial property owner John Alley voiced his anger to Mayor Karen Bass, describing the fires near MacArthur Park. Quote, "There are two types of fire, the ones that to cook meth and the ones to stay warm." Alley warned Mayor Bass on January 4th, predicting tragedy. Days later, massive wind-fueled fires tore through Pacific Palisades and Altadena. LA Mayor Bass faced backlash for cutting $17.5 million from the LAFD's budget months before the January wildfires. Civilian staff, including fire truck mechanics, were laid off, leaving 75 trucks sidelined. Bass claimed 1,000 firefighters could have been on duty, but were sent home. She omitted the mention of those grounded trucks. While the city allocated $837 million to the fire department in 23-24, a larger $1.3 billion was funneled to homeless services. Mayor Bass declined to comment when approached by Real Clear Investigations. LA's firefighter to resident ratio remains among the worst in major U.S. cities, with only one firefighter for every 1,000 residents. For comparison, cities like Chicago, Dallas, and Houston have nearly double that coverage. We are joined now by the lead investigator covering the issue, Real Clear Investigations, Ana Kasparian. Thank you so much for being here, Ana.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.
So obviously this is a story that has a little bit of a personal element to you living in Los Angeles. How does this level of lawlessness and danger continue to persist?
I think it continues to persist for a multitude of reasons. Number one, I really do feel that local media has kind of dropped the ball in failing to report on the prevalence of these fires that keep happening, what the cause of those fires are. And I think the culture in California in general, and especially in places like Los Angeles, is, well, if you're pinning fires on vulnerable groups of people, and in this case, we're talking about homeless individuals, well, you're stigmatizing the homeless. And in Democratic politics right now, the culture of Democratic politics right now has been to avoid anything that could stigmatize vulnerable communities, even if said vulnerable communities are causing some serious problems, including fire threats, including, crime, lack of safety, drug trafficking. That's not to say that every homeless person in California or Los Angeles is engaging in bad behavior or criminality or starting fires, but there's enough instances for this to be such a huge issue that our lawmakers and our local leadership needs to do something in response to it. At this point, the Los Angeles Fire Department is responding to far more homeless encampment fires as opposed to wildfires that have been sparked for other reasons. And so when you see where the resources are going, when you see just how much of our tax money is going toward responding to an issue that could be solved by ensuring that we're actually housing these people and not giving them an option to live on the streets, we'd be in a way better situation. But that takes time, money, strategy. And honestly, I really feel that our leadership here isn't interested in any of that. They want to claim victory without actually accomplishing a damn thing. And I'm tired of it. So I felt that it was important to draw attention to this story.
Well, you mentioned the leadership, and you wonder where those orders, so to speak, for the LAFD. Not to say that it's coming from homeless individuals. I know you mentioned that in your report. You're wondering who's telling them to do that, right?
Right. So Gigi Graciette, who is one of, in my opinion, the best local news reporters, she works for Fox 11, a local Fox affiliate. She didn't name any names, but she has said on multiple occasions that the higher ups within the Los Angeles Fire Department have communicated to her on multiple occasions that local leadership in Los Angeles has essentially advised them to avoid pinning any of these encampment fires on homeless encampments, even when there is evidence to prove that that is the case. They are just to say, number one, do not refer to them as homeless, refer to them as unhoused. And number two, say that the fire is still under investigation, even though the investigation has determined that the fire was started by an encampment. There was a fire, for instance, last year that shut down the 10 freeway, one of the major, freeways here in the LA area. And it was because of a fire that essentially started in the, underneath a freeway overpass. And so that melted some of the metal beams, kind of suspending the freeway up. And everyone was suspecting that there was a homeless encampment underneath the freeway that sparked the fire. Gavin Newsom himself admitted that it was arson. It was a case of arson. But then immediately, Mayor Karen Bass comes out and says, don't blame it on the homeless. We have no evidence that it's the homeless. Okay, well, then what started the fire? All we keep hearing, even today, is that it's under investigation. And look, understand, I'm not saying that we need to, imprison homeless people or anything like that. But I think there's a very real problem right now where local leaders will approach individuals in homeless encampments. They will offer them either shelter, a hotel room, temporary housing, some form of housing. But if they reject the housing, okay, well, they rejected the housing. Now we get to walk away and just leave it alone. No, don't leave it alone. Why is it acceptable for these encampments to grow? Why are we giving people an option to build encampments when in reality, they have a housing option that they can take? I don't think that they should be given the choice. They need to take the housing, period.
So, what do you think it will take to protect LA's citizens and first responders who we've seen have gotten injured having to respond to these fires?
Well, voters need to wake up. And, I have been pessimistic about that because, especially in Los Angeles, political involvement is far lower than other parts of the country. People aren't as politically engaged. However, I will note that the living conditions in LA County have devolved so significantly that in this past election, LA voters voted, the election outcome was 11% more Republican in this last election cycle. And I think it's because of the fact that Angelenos and Californians are just really sick of what we're seeing right now. This need to, to steal a phrase from the right, this need to virtue signal as opposed to actually doing the work to help these people get off the streets, to do something in response to crime. We just learned that there was a gang member who had been, he allegedly was a reformed gang member who was trying to address the root causes of crime and interrupt the process of young people joining gangs. Well, it turns out he was still a gang member. He was involved in all sorts of, nefarious acts, including allegedly a murder. And the city had been funneling millions and millions of dollars to him dating back all the way to 2011 to provide services for the youth services for at-risk youth specifically. And we're tired of getting robbed. That's what I feel like living in LA. I feel that we're getting robbed. We're paying the highest taxes. We're living in the highest tax state. And our quality of life has diminished considerably in just 10 short years.
And so, speaking a little bit about where is the money, where's the money going? Obviously, city leaders seem to be more willing to invest in nonprofits than in emergency services that protect everybody. You saw that the LAFD had significantly less funding than they were putting in towards these homeless individuals. So, why is that the case? Why are they trying to invest more in one area than the other? And is that the right approach?
I don't think it's the right approach. And the reason why I don't think it's the right approach is because, nonprofit tends to have a positive, connotation, right? People think nonprofits are usually good. They're doing charitable work. But in reality, nonprofits can also engage in the theft of taxpayer resources. And that has certainly been the case here in Los Angeles and in California in general. So there hasn't really been a review mechanism to ensure these nonprofits are actually carrying out services that are, improving the situation for homeless individuals in the state and in the city. And so there have been countless cases of some of these nonprofits, getting audited. And then it turns out that they were padding their own pockets. The head of LASA ended up giving a giant grant to a nonprofit that her husband is employed by, and that grant was to the tune of $2.5 million. Obviously, a conflict of interest that was unacceptable. And, we learned through an audit, I believe it was last year, that the state squandered $24 billion that was allocated for the homeless. The homeless situation has not improved. And so the thought that hardworking, tax-paying, productive members of society in the state of California keep paying more and more in taxes as their quality of life decreases, is diminished, is infuriating. And the only way it's going to change, is if voters wake up and realize that these Democratic lawmakers, these specific Democratic lawmakers and leaders are not interested in doing what's right. They sure do seem interested in collecting taxes and funneling it over to these nonprofits and NGOs.
I know this might be putting it a bit bluntly, so to speak, but how many homes need to burn before meaningful action is taken? Obviously, you might not have a number, but what do you say to that?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, things seem to have kind of hit a fever pitch after the latest wildfires, in Altadena and Pacific Palisades. These fires kind of lifted the veil on Karen Bass's leadership in Los Angeles. She's a very pleasant person. She's very smiley, and she was always able to kind of message her way through controversy. But in this particular case, she has been unable to do so. You have a 117 million gallon reservoir that was empty as the fires hit. She was warned on multiple occasions of the coming fire weather, meaning the Santa Ana winds, which were very likely to spark these wildfires. She left to Ghana anyway. She is not a leader. She thought she could just skate by. I don't know what kind of political aspiration she has, but serving as the mayor of Los Angeles wasn't really it, because she's not being a leader. She's not doing what's necessary. And honestly, the other thing I'll just say, I'm so sick of Democratic leaders in LA and California cowering in the face of loud, angry activists who have a self-interest in what they're promoting. They want those government grants funding their nonprofits. So anyone who questions what the city and state is doing in response to the homelessness crisis, they will, of course, attack, they will bully. But if we have politicians in this state and in this city who are that afraid, who are that cowardly, that they can't handle like a small group of activists screaming at the top of their lungs, they need to get out. They need to make way for actual leadership who wants to represent the best interests of Californians and Angelenos.
You perhaps just answered it, but the biggest question of all is who should be held accountable and how are we going to see them held accountable?
Well, the Federal Bureau of Investigation launched the investigation into the gang member that I was referring to earlier, the guy who was allegedly carrying out programs for restorative justice. I hate to say it, but I think at this point, we can't rely on the state to do the appropriate investigations. I think that we need the DOJ to get involved, to look into these nonprofits, to see where this money has been going, to investigate some of the corruption that's been going on. I get that it's the Trump administration. I have a lot of critical things to say about the Trump administration, but what the FBI has done under the Trump administration in regard to that gang leader was impressive. And we need more investigations like that in California to change things.
Anything you'd like to add as we wrap things up?
I would just ask for my fellow Californians to remember a time when this state was run well, when we felt that the high taxes that we pay were worth it, when we felt that we were safe, that our streets were clean. And yes, we've always had a homelessness problem, but there was an appropriate response to that problem by giving people housing, whether it's temporary or permanent, and not giving them an option to, live out on the streets in these very dangerous and unsanitary encampments. Please remember those days, because we can get those days back. We just need to get active, and we need to demand more from our leaders.
And where can people find you?
You can find me at The Young Turks, a daily show that I host. We are live from 3 to 6 p.m. Pacific. So 6 p.m. Eastern is when we start live. And you can check that out at youtube.com/The Young Turks. You can also check me out over at Substack, where I run a page called Unaligned. And I do a lot of interviews, write a lot of columns and pieces there that I think the audience will enjoy. So thank you.
All righty. Well, Ana, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you.
That was it for the Miller Report. We'll see you next time.